swatch and talk about a different malware family that's a little bit more sophisticated than this, called Powerlix. Not quite fileless, but still good try. So Powerlix is a malware family. It emerged, it's basically an evolution of Wowlix. So it essentially functions as a click fraud malware. So if you're not familiar with click fraud malware, what click fraud malware does is it essentially makes requests and simulates network activity that one would normally associate with a user in a browser clicking on ads. Right? So users not browsing anything, but a process on their system is going out and making it look like they are so that they can generate revenue for the attacker. One thing that's interesting about click fraud malware, and I don't see it mentioned all that often, is that when you think about it, there's tons of malicious ads around the internet at any given point in time, right? So by simulating and performing that click fraud routine, in a lot of cases, you could end up with multiple malware families on your system because Powerlix doesn't care. It's just simulating interaction with ads. If it happens to come across another ad that's been compromised in an unrelated attack, you may end up with a secondary malware on your system. So in this particular example, with Powerlix, they were doing a lot of ongoing development and kind of implementing some of the conventional techniques that we've seen from malware families that are commonly classified as fileless in nature. So we wanted to kind of walk through some of that. So with the particular example of an attack that I want to walk through, it was delivered via Angler Exploit Kit in 2014. But what was interesting about the delivery mechanism, it wasn't doing a mouse spam campaign with a malicious attachment that when you open it up would do stuff. It was actually basically the exploit kit was made an entry in the registry, and it would use run-dll32 to call JavaScript, and the JavaScript was actually encoded with JScript encode, but it would point to another location in memory, the default run key value for HKCU, or the hotkey current user, to find what would actually be executed. So if you go to the second location in the registry to try to see what exactly this entry was actually trying to execute, what you come away with is an encoded JavaScript. So if you decode that JavaScript, what you find is that it contains a base64 encoded blob, which I truncated and kind of circled around in this particular screenshot because it was extremely long. So, okay, well, let's go see what's in that base64 encoded blob. And when you decode that base64 encoding, what you find is that you have a ton of PowerShell that's being used to execute code. Inside of that PowerShell is another base64 encoded blob. So you've got a multi-tier encoding convention being used for that persistence mechanism that I've been talking about. Now, if you take a look at this particular base64 encoded blob, what it is it's the actual executable binary that's being basically stored in memory and then executed to kick off Powerlix, following a reboot.
So the next one we'll talk about is DNS Messenger. It's one that Edmund and I looked at earlier this year that's pretty darn interesting. To start, I'll just briefly go through DNS forwarding, make sure everybody understands. When you have a system talking to DNS, it's typically talking to its local DNS server. And what then happens, it's not the endpoint, the client system that's talking to every subsequent DNS server to make that resolution. It's the local DNS server that's talking to the root servers and then the registrar servers, et cetera, before it finally gets a resolution for a particular DNS name. So this all kind of came about by Simpo posting a tweet that happens to mention SourceFire. Formerly SourceFire, Cisco. This caught us as kind of interesting. So we decided to take a closer look. Challenge accepted. The root of this particular one is a Word document. Not in and of itself fileless, but it's part of the delivery mechanism. It's not the payload. Sure.
Yeah, so one thing I always like to point out is this really, the reconstruction of the infection process associated with DNS Messenger, I like to point it out because when we started this, all we had was a base64 encoded string that was in a tweet online. So we didn't have significant amount of IOC data. And it really shows, some of the effort that sometimes has to be put in when you go from, oh, here's this random, IOC to here's a multi-stage infection process. It took a lot of pivoting when we were first looking at this. We were combing data, trying to go from where this base64 encoded string is using, what stage of an infection is it in, how's it originating, what's the initial infection vector, et cetera.
All right, and one other thing that was kind of interesting about this particular document, obviously it's branded with McAfee Secure. It's made to look like it's a trusted document or it's gone through some sort of scanning mechanism. Adds to the trust of the document. Obviously it's not to be trusted. So going back to the document contains a big blob of VBA code. When the document's opened, it executes this code. This code happened to include another string that was encoded PowerShell code. So the first thing it does is it launches a PowerShell process and executes the code that's embedded in the document. That code happens to be two of, I don't know, five or six stages. And the first bit of code, what it's doing is it's trying to determine if there was, it determines whether there's persistence, which again is not fileless, and that's the only thing that kind of sets this one apart. And to execute the code immediately or wait for that persistence mechanism to trigger. And then a bunch of parameters that define further down the chain what it's doing and how it's doing it. So this is showing, based on the privilege set of the user, where it's saving its persistence, if persistence is defined, and how it's doing it. So whether it's writing to the alternate data stream or whether it's writing to the registry. And what it's doing at this point is it's writing more PowerShell code to those points to be executed. Sure.
So one of the things that I just want to point out is this is a perfect example of what we've been talking about as it pertains to persistence and how persistence works with malware. I've said it a few times because it's important, and I want to make sure that everyone understands that in this particular case, it was just a switch statement. If the attacker wanted to be overly stealthy, they could choose just simply not to include persistence, and none of this would have actually occurred on the system. There would be no registry activity, there would be no alternate data stream activity, but it really demonstrates that, from an attacker's perspective, they have a decision to make. Do I want to be very, very sneaky, not include any sort of these types of artifacts and possibly lose my foothold once the system reboots? Or do I want to make sure that I have continuous long-term access to a system? And if I do that, then obviously that creates more noise. And from a defender's perspective, this noise is exactly what you need to be looking for. Registry activity that is often associated with malicious or malware infections on systems, and file system activity. And we'll go through some of that a little bit later, but that persistence piece is really key when it comes to determining whether or not something can even be implemented in an actual fileless way on systems.
And that's especially important to note because this particular piece of malware, when it's going through its various stages, it's entirely within the memory space of that one PowerShell process. So when it's doing its thing, it may be getting more code, and I'll talk about that here in a bit, actually. But it's just doing everything within the confines of the PowerShell process. It's not writing to disk at all, other than that perhaps persistent mechanism. So if persistence is achieved, what it does is it'll run this subsequent stage every time the system's rebooted. It'll use DNS text records to determine how it's doing it, when it's doing it, and even pulling down subsequent code. So it's using text records specifically to a random domain selected from this list. And it'll just keep cycling through the domains until it finds one that actually responds with the context that it's looking for. If it succeeds, the second bit of code here is going to be the PowerShell, the next set of PowerShells to decode and execute.
How long was that text record?
So I don't remember the exact size off the top of my head.
Greater than?
I know it was over TCP for this particular interaction because it had to be.
In
It
fact-
wouldn't fit within a UDP packet.
In fact, I think one of the following slides will actually show a Wireshark capture that may show it for you. So stage 4, this is after it's either determined whether to create that persistence or not, but either way, when that code is executed, what it does is it executes command.exe. It'll redirect standard in, out, and standard error, and then it'll tie that to the PowerShell process for monitoring that command shell. And it then uses a protocol that it defined or built to communicate with that remotely. So when that command shell comes up, what's the first thing you see? You see the copyright and you see the C prompt, right? So that's the first thing this PowerShell will do. It'll read that standard in, it'll push it out over DNS, and wait for a response. So the attacker can actually interface. In fact, here's a little bit about the protocol, but the attacker can actually interface with that command shell just via DNS, which again is going to be fileless. It's not using HTTP. You're not going to pick it up in proxies, anything like that.
And I guess it's probably important to clarify, when we say SYN message in the previous slide, this slide, and subsequent slides, we're not talking about like SYN packets that you would normally associate with like a TCP IP connection. This was actually a stage in the custom command and control channel that they had created for this malware that the initial packets were SYN. So one of the first DNS requests that this thing would make in the last stage was called a SYN message within that C2 protocol, and it was responsible for querying a C2 domain, and then based on the response of that server, determining whether or not it should even continue to run. So at any given point in time, the attacker could say, no, I don't want you to run this time, simply using information stored within DNS TXT records.
Right, the names you see here are based purely on the code that the actor produced. So this is what the actor was calling it. Yeah.
How is the malware able to stimulate a TCP connection?
Well, so again, it's not over TCP. It's all over DNS. If the DNS record happens to be long enough, DNS will inherently switch to TCP over DNS.
Does the server say switch
Yeah.
to TCP?
In this case, no, unless the output from the command shell is going to be too long, then DNS in and of itself will switch to a TCP transaction.
Yeah, so I guess to clarify a little bit more, so the SYN query and SYN response was like a, hey, Mr. C2 server, are you there? Should I continue to run? And the C2 server would respond with yes, no. If the answer was yes, continue to run, then DNS queries were made to a DNS server within that array list that you saw on the previous slide, and the response to that TXT record query that the malware submitted would be large enough that it had to flip over to a TCP connection over UDP.
So that flip over, is that controlled by the operating system libraries, or is that controlled by the intermediate server? That's
So
what I'm getting at.
I can take this.
Yeah.
So this particular PowerShell was actually taking advantage of NSLOOKUP. It would just call out to NSLOOKUP, make the query, read the response. So it was all up to the operating system to do it, or NSLOOKUP in this particular case.
Cool.
But that's just a protocol thing. Like UDP can only get so big.
Right.
So here's an example of the SYN query. And again, this is DNS, all DNS. This is UDP. It's making a particular query and composing the DNS record that it's querying based off of the way that it talks through this protocol that it designed. And the response is what determines whether to keep going or not. And here's an example of the command output. This is after PowerShell DNS Messenger has taken control of the command prompt, and this is the output from the command prompt over DNS. And you can see that decoded here very messily, but you can very clearly see the copyright and the C prompt that it's presenting and sending over DNS.
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, this was a pretty unique approach to being able to obtain a bidirectional Windows command prompt that you could interact with directly from the attacker-controlled server, all implemented over DNS TXT records. And TXT records they're pretty common. Historically, they were used to put tags on assets like hey, this is Jim's server, or this server is located in this particular data center. But nowadays they're used for security-related functions, so things like SPF, DKIM, DMARC. These are all security-related mechanisms that are implemented using these sort of TXT records. So they're extremely common, and I don't think a lot of people do much inspection of the contents of the DNS responses that are received related to these sorts of queries. But stepping back a little bit, let's talk about some different ways that we can defend against this sort of malware. So we spent a lot of time, we walked through a few different examples of the actual characteristics, how malware is implementing delivery, how malware is implementing the execution phase, and more importantly, the persistence phase when it comes to the discussion of fileless versus not fileless malware. So how do we defend against it? I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes down to the same best practices that we've been preaching for an extended period of time, right? So using things like system monitoring and logging on endpoints is extremely important when it comes to detecting this sort of activity, right? So monitoring for the introduction of new run keys might be a bit noisy, but if you tune it over time, it's going to be pretty easy to cut down on that. Run keys aren't just like dynamically added to Windows endpoints in most corporate environments very, very frequently, or so much so that you're going to drown a security team in unnecessary alerts. Also monitoring of WMI subscriptions and looking for things that look malicious that are related to WMI. We mentioned an example earlier where the entire persistence mechanism was deployed and implemented using WMI subscription, and the code was present within the WMI database. So it was basically just creating a subscription that was the equivalent of a registry run key using a different mechanism. Once again, still had to write it to that WMI database. And also monitoring file system modifications. So if you're not monitoring things like executable creation and app data and temp and things like that on endpoints, you're going to miss a lot of stuff. This is a perfect way to provide early indication that something malicious has been dropped on an endpoint. Files added to particular startup locations. That's one very, very common way that malware has, for an extended period of time, implemented that persistence that we've been talking about. Scheduled task creation. I don't think you're going to find that on most standard endpoints within corporate environments, that there are a ton of changes to the startup task creation mechanisms within Windows. Usually you're not going to see a ton of different scheduled tasks being dynamically added on like an hourly or daily basis in most cases. And then just
more importantly, task header logs turned off by default, so you need to turn the damn thing on.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. So don't rely on factory default logging configurations in operating systems if you have the capabilities to be able to look at them and determine what you need to turn on within your environment, because you will miss stuff if you just run with defaults. It's the same thing. You can use group policy. You wouldn't deploy a Windows endpoint in a corporate environment using just the default group policy. Likewise, don't use the default logging configuration if you can afford to turn it on, collect the logs in centralized locations, and then run rule sets against them, hunt for threats, things like that. Yeah, so another good point is default file associations in Windows, right? So by default, so what we've seen historically and it's going to execute code, right? So most users in most corporate environments don't need to double-click JavaScript files that are stored in
undo all that, and they're having a fight with Microsoft so as to not push that.
Yeah,
and they're actually getting traction, so hopefully that'll be something that can, the fixed file extensions can stay persistent, let's hope.
Yeah, the Windows 10 upgrades, I just recently reported this to Microsoft, that they're undoing a lot of these settings, so unless you're controlled in a GPO environment.
Oh, I'm talking your story.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks for that.
Can malware
so-
change those?
What's
Yeah.
that?
Can malware change file
Yeah,
associations?
absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that it could undo your changes theoretically, yes?
Yes, but you can monitor them. So,
and at the same time, before it is able to modify those file associations, it's already executing code on your system, so you already owned it at that point. We see that a lot with some, I'll call it low-tier ransomware that we see in the wild, where they don't actually implement like an encryption mechanism. They simply change the file associations, so you can't open them unless you change all that back, as an example. And then from a networking perspective, monitor your network traffic, right? That's pretty fundamental, and everyone should be doing that, and they should have been. If you're not, you should definitely get on that. So that's connections to C2 servers, anomalous DNS traffic. Maybe monitor for DNS over TCP if it's not that common in your environment. Might find some things that way. I hope I don't need to say this, but I'm going to. So segment your assets of differing value, right? Flat networks are extremely easy to manage, but they don't afford much in the ability to implement some of the inspection and security controls that I would typically recommend in most environments. So if you have high value assets, segment those from low value assets. And by doing that, you're going to create choke points within your overall network environment. And choke points are great. That's what we want from an inspection standpoint, because those choke points provide perfect places within an overall network architecture for you to be able to deploy security controls, inspection, monitoring, and prevention capabilities. So with that, shameless plug, I work for Cisco Talos. One of the things that we really try to do is we try to provide as much of the research as we can to the general public to try to make the internet a safer place. So we provide a lot of different ways where you can just go out and see some of the research that we're doing, some of the malware write-ups that we're doing, a lot of the different information that we release. We release it for free. If you have a computer with internet access, hit our blog and you'll be able to pull down IOC data that we've collected. Anytime we come across a new attack or a new threat in the wild that we feel like organizations should know about and be aware of, we try to publish as much information as we can to make the internet a safer place so that organizations can see if they're impacted. So, other companies can take that data and do with it what they will, but basically to raise the bar for the entire industry.
Good find on CCleaner.
Hey, appreciate that. Appreciate that. That was, I actually, it's funny that you say that. I planned on spending a lot of time this past week on kind of polishing a few of these slides, but I was pretty busy with some of that research we were doing. And with that, that's all I have. So we will be over in the lobby bar for a little bit. If anyone has questions, wants to talk about any of the things that we covered, any of the malware families or anything like that, I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Good job. Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
You do something special with this.
Why are you breaking this?
Because it's easier to...
Why are you breaking my cables, man?
Quick question.
Sure.
So you guys are worried about attackers attacking you guys personally?
Yeah, I mean, it's...
So I've been researching botnets, but I can't really just publish without worrying about getting attacked.
Yeah, so...
Here, thumb drive. First you know how to make sure there's nothing on it, unless the Chinese put something on it.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, so if you look, we actually released two logs over the past week about a supply chain attack that affected an application called CCleaner. And if you look at the analysis we did of the C2 server information we obtained, we actually were listed in there was a domain array that was used to determine whether a subsequent stage payload should be served. And one of the domains actually was Cisco.com. So
awesome.
That's a good example, right?
I've been monitoring.
We weren't actually impacted, but it just shows that, you asked the question, and that's a perfect example. That's very timely.
I've been monitoring C2 and for the bot.
Okay.
I think it's called QBot.
Yeah.
And I see people talking on it. I see script kids talking on the C2 channel.
Yeah.
And I would like to share that stuff.
You guys say monitor WMI subscription. How do you propose you do that?
What's that?
Monitor WMI subscription.
I mean,
Your own tool doesn't do that, no offense. Clarion doesn't do that.
I mean, I would have to look at the documentation from Windows on exactly the best way to do that.
So the best way is to get a subscription to monitor the external.
I mean,
there's no event log, there's no event created by default.
I mean, there's not events created for a lot of stuff by default on Windows. Because
that'll be on my subscription.
Yeah, I mean...
Like, that's when you think about it from like a events in-depth perspective. One of the first areas you can start is having host itself, right?
Because I do use there's some tools that I use sometimes, and I install it once I'm done and remove it.
I'm sure. They're pretty good.
We got front row seats over here.
Start to drag a little bit.
Yeah, they're a long bit already.
Late last night. Did a double work.
I hear appreciate it.
Scrambling eggs for that last night when we got home.
We ended up just going home and I ate way too many calories. I was out of calories before I even got here last night.
Let's just go home. She's like, how about we get the Waffle House or something?
Now, see, there's a White House right down here. First Street. There's one at First right after me, right? That's White House.
I was there.
I go there, so when people come to visit, come to Kentucky. It's right there with Elon. It's either first or second. But all the people that come to town to visit me, they all stay at the hotel. So we go to the bar there, and then like 2 in the morning we go.
That's some breakfast place on Dutcher's Lane where we come up.
Not that one. 7th and Marion Man's place.
I'm going to try not to think about it, because I'm being one glass down there tonight. I'm going to drink all this beer. I'm going to go, man, I'm going to damn White Castle. Can't do it. I'm not going to. I love White Castle. Yeah, I think you have to have to the concert. Are you allowed to have a close one?
Not that I've ever heard of. Tommy is the first thing that ever.
Jeopardy.
Tonight and tomorrow.
You can try to find drink tickets over there. It's all about security.
Free drink you can go get it yourself. And then other people are just so appreciative. The ones that are really appreciative, really appreciative. Like,
It's a pretty cool bar. I think I got
had a lot of
pictures.
fun giving them away.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, didn't you see that? I don't remember that. I must have. Oh my God! Dude, I've been dropping. That's one of Matt's
Well,
guys.
you didn't drop that on?
Yeah, it's Brandon.
You didn't drop that.
He's here again.
Yeah, it's a pretty big party. You know, always.
Really? I never got those things last year.
I don't even know what that means. Just like start one here and forget. I get one every time.
I'm trying to do the parties tomorrow. Tonight.
Not the alcohol.
It's unfortunate. I always have a good time here, but it wears you to shit out because I'm not going to get to back to work. So it's like party all weekend and then I go back to work. So,
Trying to take advantage of the party.
oh, yeah.
I never got her name.
do remember her, yes.
She was like from San Diego or
Yeah, we gave her a bunch of drink tokens, yeah.
And this dude's a security guy. Like this. And then this is the guy that took the picture with my phone. Send back to factoring after.
You guys have HDMI?
Well, he's here, so. This thing's actually working. Oh, wrong one. Wrong end. There we go. Hey, girl.
So you got slides in the one?
Yes.
See?
Circle around the second floor. She's really raised that projector next to her. I'm kind of even from here. Halfway back or more.
So, you know what?
You wouldn't even know that
Power.
Oh. I'd rather do duplicate because it's easy for me for the demo, but if I have to do it, I have a video just in case. So I think we're good.
Thank you.
I can extend works, but oh, the admin. Yeah, I know. That I have. It's just that when I'm gonna do a demo, I want to show my tool, but I want to see it from here, not from there, because it's gonna be weird.
So it's not letting you do duplicate at all? Because it popped up from here.
So duplicate.
Nah, just go check.
Which do you want to use?
HDMI.
Oh, no, we can't do HDMI.
I don't have VGA.
I know, we do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so not Alright, so...
But I know, but I want. That's what I'm saying. I don't have VGA. Oh no, on this computer. This way?
I should be actively converting to
It's okay. I was expecting this, and I can do extend.
Yeah, I'm guessing it was up here already.
Yeah. Is it okay? Can we try another up there?
I don't know if we have another one.
Oh,
We just have
okay.
HDMI, right?
Another portion of the room completely went away. Did you get here and trying to
Hey, if there's empty spots in between people, can you guys start moving to the right so that everybody can get in and sit down? Your other right.
kind of test. You know, either you're storing potential in your script, or you're typing and there's a reason for potential, so someone will capture it, and we can access the replay. That's true, that it is. It's excellent. It's really a good way to defend against your Well, I did see the one at your house.
No.
If you don't do it right,
Hope this is gonna work out.
We got another guy coming.
Okay. What's up, everyone? How's Derby going? There you go. That's what we need. Yep, it's not gonna work. Hey.
You having trouble with your adapter, the AV adapter?
I have this HDMI. That,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a, well, because it keeps dropping, by any chance do you have a mini display port?
No, I don't. I don't think so. This is kind of new.
Yes, you have.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Just so, because it keeps dropping.
Yeah, it does.
So let's try this real quick. And the port to the left of that, closer to the... There you go. And plug in those VGA on the side here.
I have HDMI though.
Just strangely, give it a second. So I don't know that it could, well, that's a different way to do that. No, so it's this. Let's get rid of this out of the equation. Let's go straight to this. One less step. These are not as reliable as this.
Let's try. We'll see.
That's true. So now that it's plugged in, let's go ahead and try to use the controls to make it go. So Windows P. No, there you go.
Everybody knows this is I loaded it as a software package in SSE and deployed it with /reflect bracket. I was like, that's it. Yeah. I said, well, open the window and let me jump out.
I think the other one was better.
No, the guy figured it out.
Second.
And I was like,
1, 2, 3, 4.
what that document says, it literally is /reflect bracket. He said, I literally just read that. Exactly what it says. I talked to Joe and he said he was doing it. But apparently what they're doing, they were copying the file down, and then they're using SSCO to execute a bat script to run that file. Well, that's why
First time for it.
you have to load it actually in SSCO and push it as a
So it just doesn't like it. That's the first time I've ever seen that not work.
I don't know why.
I guess, I mean, we can try the other one, at least the other one. Yeah, let's see. Yep.
So,
Hopefully we'll get lucky.
Yeah, there, let's try that.
I didn't see the mini split part first time around.
Yeah.
Come on, come on. Oh. I think so. Let's see. Yep.
So now it's extended.
Can you duplicate?
Ooh.
What happened?
Goes away.
It's the video.
So I had to go over to work, so I put my partner and held it up, boop, door open.
And that's not even like a good system.
All right. I'm gonna ask again. I hope I hear. Hey, good cheers. Hey, Jess. Hey there, Recon. How's it going? Yeah. There you go. Okay. Cool. So I don't know if you can tell, but I'm actually freaking out right now. So if I, do say something that doesn't make any sense, just like, play it cool. At least give me one shot. So I'm going to talk about lateral movement today, and we're going to talk about hunting for lateral movement. So definitely a blue team talk. However, in order to hunt for lateral movement, you really need to understand how lateral movement works. So that is why I definitely go through red team techniques and tools to really hunt for it. As you can tell by my name, I'm not from around. We'll get there. And as you can tell by the name of my talk, I don't really have a good imagination. It was either this or hunting like a boss, which is a complete ripoff from Rocky's talk also. But I promise that the content is better than the name. All right. So a little bit of me. I'm actually from Peru. Has anyone been to Peru? Yay, 2. Okay. Fun fact about Peru, you probably didn't know this. So a few thousand years ago, the old Peruvians actually domesticated a poisonous root and used it a lot on their diet. We still use it a lot. And in the 1500s, the Spanish came, colonized us. They took this back to Europe, and they became big in Ireland, UK, and all over Europe. I'm actually talking about potatoes. So if you guys, next time that you're eating your cheeseburger and French fries or your home fries or whatever kind of way potatoes are eaten, think about Peru. That's my peeps. You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so I lead the blue team at a financial services company in New York. I started as a pen tester, and then 5 years ago I actually moved to New York for this job, and I've been here since. It's been a ride. I have to say, when I first started doing blue, I always thought I was going to come back to red because I always thought it was sexier. I can tell you now, blue is sexy, and yeah. That's my Twitter account. I love to connect. I love to meet this awesome community. I'm really honored and excited and afraid and frightened of being here. So all the possible feelings I am feeling right now. But yeah. So all right. So this is the agenda. We're quickly going to talk about introduction, just kind of define what lateral movement is. We're going to go from a red team perspective, analyze the techniques and tools. Then blue team. Focusing on event logs, and then I'm going to actually release, well, not release, but show you a tool I'm going to release in the next couple of weeks that is hopefully will be able to help you guys in your hunts for lateral movement. All right, so let's go ahead and start. So just let's define, right, lateral movement. So once an attacker has a foothold on your environment, either through a server-side attack or a client-side attack, or it really doesn't matter. Once they have that initial foothold, lateral movement are the techniques that enable the adversary to access and control systems on a network, right? I took this from MITRE, awesome resource. So the premise is there's an initial foothold, right? And then lateral movement are techniques that enable this attacker to move around the network and look for the information that they want to go after. Lateral movement is not always required. If you think about if an attacker is only trying to go after one user's information, emails, files, whatever, if that first fish gives you a shell, then you don't need to do anything else. That's it, right? No need to move laterally. However, most of the cases, it's not going to be like that, right? It's really unlikely for an attacker to send 100 fishes, you get a few shells. It's really unlikely for the target information that's going to be on those first 10 shells, right? So they have to go through this process of moving laterally in order to find the information they're looking for and then finally exfiltrating it, right? And I like this approach because, types of attacks, they have to move laterally. And I repeat, have. And I like this have because now this gives me the opportunity, me as a blue team, to go look for them while they're trying to do this. Now, lateral movement is not straightforward in the sense that they're not going to, on that first next hop, they're not going to find the information they're going after, right? They're going to have to initially do reconnaissance and figure out where they are and where the database servers are if they're looking for that or whatever. Email servers, whatever it is that they're going after, it's going to take them some time to figure that out. If it's going to be easy for them, then you have other problems. But if they don't really know your network, it's going to take them time, right? And initially they're going to move laterally to hosts that they don't really care, but they don't know that because they're looking for information. So they're going to leave traces behind. And if we hunt for this, we look for them, we may find them. And that's the whole concept of this talk. I think that as an industry, and even the tools that are being sold to us, and believe me, coming from financial services in New York, there's a lot of tools that get advertised every day. Every day there's emails with new tools that prevent all the breaches that happen every day, right? So I think that we are focusing too much on the left side of the attack life cycle. We're trying to prevent that first shell. We're trying to look for that first shell, but we're not trying to look for them while they're already in the network, right? So if an attacker is able to bypass those first controls on the left side of the life cycle, then it's easy for them to move laterally. No one's looking for them, right? So they're not going to be found. I was talking to pen testers, just doing more research about this talk, and they were telling me the same. Like once I have credentials, that's it. It's just a matter of time until I get to the right place and run Mimikatz on the right place, right? So that's the concept of my goal and my tool is, I'm not saying don't focus on the left side of things, and I'm saying, hey, balance it out a little bit, and sure, let's try to prevent that initial fish, that initial shell, and look for them in that, but also, let's try to look them while they're already on the network, right? Let's also try to detect ongoing breaches, right? So, just to sum it up, like, why should we care? So, I think we need to redefine, like, our goal is not to prevent that first shell, right? Our goal is to prevent exfiltration. So if we can detect lateral movement or prevent it, we win, because then you're stopping exfiltration, right? This talk is about detecting lateral movement, not preventing, just to make that clear. All right, so now let's analyze things from a red team perspective. Of course, if you're on a hunt for lateral movement, you really need to understand how lateral movement techniques are implemented, right? So there's no way we can be good blue teamers if we don't understand the red team, right? So we have to. There's no other way. So let's talk about that. So there's definitely a lot of techniques out there. I want to focus on one and the most important one, which is abusing legitimate Windows services features, right? And that's the common technique. Again, I was at the Black Hills Information Security talk, and they mentioned right away, once we're on an assessment, once we find those credentials, then that's where we start moving laterally. So they always using credentials. If you talk to the incident response guys, and just like here, like I found this Mandiant quote from a couple of years ago, but I think it validates what I'm trying to say, that they based on other engagements, they always see credentials being stolen, 100%. And that's the most common technique used for lateral movement. So I want to focus on that, abusing legitimate Windows services using credentials that you've stolen somehow, right? So we're going to focus on that. It doesn't matter how you stole the credential. I'm not going to focus on that. Let's assume that the credential has been stolen, admin credentials, and then you start moving laterally by abusing Windows services. So this is the first technique, abusing Windows services, right? Specifically SCM, which is a service control manager, part of Windows that manages all the services, right? So if you're a admin, you can actually interact with SCM through the network. A couple of ways. One, RPC, so port 135, and also over SMB, which is something I didn't know until I did this research, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So if you want to do this natively, you can just use the SC commands that are native on any Windows host to create a service and then start a service, or you can use PowerShell, or there's a bunch of tools. This is the most common technique implemented. So PSExec, Metasploit, Empire, the in-packet libraries. There's another one called PAExec that I didn't know about. They all implement this technique. So PSExec, the way it works, is it first authenticates, maps an administrator share, the admin administrator share, copies the PSExec service binary to that share, and then talks to the SCM through RPC to start the service, and then you get a shell. Metasploit does it a little bit different, and when I was doing my testing, I realized that once Metasploit drops that binary, it doesn't talk RPC at all through port 135, and I didn't know how it was doing it. And I realized by looking at Wireshark that Metasploit actually uses SMB only and connects through SCM through a name pipe. The name pipe is called SBC-CTL. So Metasploit doesn't need RPC to be open, just 445. I thought that was kind of interesting learning about that. So you can interact with SCM through RPC or RPC over SMB through name pipes. And then the whole concept of living off the land has been around, right? So Metasploit changed this technique, and then instead of having to drop a binary, they just call a PowerShell one-liner, and then inject shellcode and get a shell. So this applies for all the techniques that we're going to talk about. You don't really have to drop binaries anymore. You can just call PowerShell without dropping a binary. All right, so WMI, the next one. Windows Management Instrumentation. There's a particular class in WMI, it's called Win32_process. And this class allows you to instantiate processes. You can interact with WMI also through the network by using RPC. So you can natively use WMIC natively on any Windows host, or you can use invoke WMI method through PowerShell. There's also tools out there like WMIexec and all these tools that also implement this technique. Empire, CrackMapExec. Okay, the next one is abusing the task scheduler. So we can interact with the task scheduler through RPC, once again, and also through SMB over a name pipe. So natively, you can use AT or SEH tasks. There's a PowerShell commandlet that I found. I'm not sure if it can be used remotely. I'll have to test this. There's some tools that implement this technique, not as many as the other techniques. ATExec from the in-packet library, and then CrackMapExec also. Oh, something interesting I found on my testing is that, so AT was the first native Windows tool, and then SEH tasks came, right? So, but AT uses name pipes over SMB, and SEH tasks uses RPC. So I'm not sure if the way that Microsoft wants you to do things is RPC now, because that's the new way of doing it with the SEH tasks, but I thought that was interesting. All right, WinRM. So Windows management, Windows Remote Management is a Microsoft implementation of a protocol called WSMan for management of hosts. Port 5985, HTTP and HTTPS, it's a web services protocol. You can natively run commands if this service is enabled by using WinRS, just a command line tool natively, or once again. Or you can use the Metasploit. There's a Metasploit auxiliary module for this. Now, by default, first of all, this service is not enabled by default. It's only, well, on Windows 2012 and above, I think it's enabled by default, but on Windows 7, for example, it's not. But if you have like admin credentials, you can just run one command that enables it, right? So you could enable it yourself. However, the default configuration of WinRM won't allow you to use the Metasploit module because you have to configure in a way that allows unencrypted connections and doesn't and not support Kerberos. And there's a cool blog from Jason Land from Trusted Tech about how to use WinRM and PowerShell to move laterally. However, if you don't want to use PowerShell, you can just call this other command that just configures the WinRM service, and then the Metasploit module is going to work. So you just allow it encrypted through this module here, and the Metasploit module will work. There's another way of abusing WinRM by PowerShell remoting. So you can execute PowerShell scripts remotely, once again, over WinRM. And you can do this through PowerShell with the invoke command. And the PS session is pretty cool because it's kind of like SSH for Windows. If you have it enabled, it's kind of like getting a shell. And then Empire implements this technique. All right, so January this year, Matt Nelson from Spectre Ops, he posted a blog and a blog post, and he figured out how to move laterally using DCOM objects. So he found out 3 DCOM objects, MMC 20, shell windows, and shell browser window, and you can interact with them through RPC over the network if you're an admin. And then these are the ways that you can execute code remotely through these objects through PowerShell. Now, last week he tweeted about finding new ways of using these DCOM objects to move laterally by also abusing the Windows suite. And he first started with Excel, but now I think Word and PowerPoint, basically all the Windows suite you can use. So I haven't tested that yet, but that's going to be definitely the next information. I know that we could do other stuff, but I wanted to start with the simple. We all have Windows event logs, right? It's native. So let's do that. So first of all, for all the techniques that I implemented and we talked about, they all always going to leave behind some type of authentication event, right? All of them, right?
Quick question. Can you discuss what you used in logging the default configs, or did you log the configs?
Oh, the configs basically is just auditing configs, and I'm going to talk about that actually. So the first main 2 categories of logging that you want to take a look at is account logon and logon logoff on a Windows domain environment. Now the names are really confusing, but let me break it up for you. So account logon means actually authentication, credential validation, and this event will happen on the host that is the owner, or I guess authoritative for the account. So if you're using a domain account, the account logon event will happen at a domain controller, but if you use a local account, the account logon event will happen at that host that you're accessing. Now the logon logoff events, they will be logged when there's sessions being created and destroyed. And they will never happen at the domain controller, they will happen at the host that you are accessing or moving laterally to, right? So if we talk about specific events, if you're using Kerberos for account logon, you'll see a 4768 on the domain controller. If you're using NTLM, you'll see a 4776. As far as logon goes, the most important event ID here is 4624, which is the actual logon session, when the logon session starts. Now, on this guy, 4624, it has different fields, interesting fields, but the most interesting one is one called logon type, and it has like 9 different types of logon types. But the one that I've seen happen on all the lateral movement techniques that I use is type 3. Network. So this one will always, again, going back to those 5 techniques that we discussed, that I tested all, they always show a 4624 event, type 3. Now the other interesting one that you may want to know about is type 10, which is RDP. Those are the only 2 that are used for remote authentications. All the other ones are used for some kind of local authentication, like when you're on the host itself. All right, so if you use a domain account and Kerberos authentication to move laterally on our environment, this is how it looks like. So on the domain controller, you'll see a 4768, which is the account logon. you'll see the name, in this case, Mr. Burns. You'll see the IP address and the time. And what do you see on the actual host that is the victim, right, where you're moving laterally to? You'll see, again, 4624, like we talked about, type 3 on the top right there. You'll see the user, you'll see the source IP, you also see the workstation name, but in my testing, I've learned that this field doesn't really get populated all the time, and I'm not sure why. One interesting thing that you also get is a logon ID, which allows you to correlate different events for the same session. So if you're using a domain account and NTLM, not Kerberos, you'll see a 4776 on the domain controller, right? And finally, if you use a local account, you won't see any logs on the domain controller. All you see is a 4776 on the local host, and then a log on 4624 on that same host, nothing on the domain controller. So right away, when I learned about this started, bringing some ideas. Like, you can use 4776 to hunt for who's using NTLM authentication on your environment, right? I mean, you may have legacy applications, but for the most part, users will never use NTLM. Anyone using pen testing tools? So when I was doing some tests, I did two types of tests, right? Lateral movement after you had a shell on a host and move laterally from that shell, like a pivot, or lateral movement directly from a Kali Linux directly to a host. So kind of like as if you had like a physical access to the network, right? When you're doing that physical access where Metasploit is connecting directly to the victim or all the other tools, not only Metasploit, but the ones that I tested, you always see NTLM authentication. So Kerberos doesn't support, Metasploit doesn't support Kerberos. And that's why you'll see a 4776. So it could be interesting to hunt for this event. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to skip stuff because I'm running out of time. Maybe I can go back to it if we have time. All right, so system event. So this is really one really good event. So when a service is created, a log is generated, and this is on the category of system on the Windows Advanced Audit configuration. So this is really cool because this event will give us the service name and also the actual image path of the binary that's been executed. So on the left side you see psexec with the name and then actually the psexec service, and on the right side you see Metasploit. See how it has like first of all has always a weird service name, and then because it's using that one-liner PowerShell, it's also going to have the entire PowerShell command here, so you can actually use this to base64 decode it and see what happened or what kind of shell code it was used. Right? So this is a really, really reliable event. The next really reliable event is object access, and this 4698 will get logged when the scheduled task is created, right? And this will give you interesting fields such as the task name, and also on an XML within the event, the command and then the arguments. So that's interesting. For these two type of events, we get the entire command line. So that's pretty cool, and we'll use that later on the tool. Okay, next. So WMI activity. So there is an event log for WMI, and there's three types of events, 1, 2, 3, and that makes it easy. But the one that you're looking for is event 2, which has the actual event. And when you're using WMI and you're using this win32_process class, you'll see that on the event. So this is you can see here how it actually references the win32_process create. Unfortunately, this event won't give us any information about the process that was executed, at least this event, right? Unlike the other two that you get the full image path, this won't give you. However, we can use another event ID. It's just process tracking, right? It's just a Windows event that gets logged when process gets instantiated. That's a 4688. And this is where we start to see a really interesting pattern with WMI, which is on WMI, when you're doing remote lateral movement with WMI, you'll always see this process being spawned. WMI prvse.exe. And that guy will spawn your malicious process. In this case, I just run ipconfig, but you could be whatever malicious you're trying to do, right? So I went on my EDR, the endpoint detection and response tool, where I actually have like 1 billion process events approximately. And I looked for child processes of WMI prvse, and I only got 200 results. So out of 1,200,000,000, that's definitely interesting. And then I looked for when PowerShell gets spawned by this guy or when CMD gets spawned by this guy, and there are always malicious events from a pen test that we did, right? So I think this is a really, really reliable way of hunting for lateral movement using event logs and WMI, or processes and WMI, by looking for child processes of this guy. If you use Matt Nelson's technique of using this MMC20 object, COM object, you'll see some interesting behavior. You'll see that MMC will spawn your malicious process. In this case, notepad.exe. So once again, I went to me. So far, based on the techniques that I've used, this is the most stealthy way of doing it, lateral movement. I couldn't see it. All right, WinRM has a couple of logs also. To be honest, I haven't yet figured out exactly what's the best way of time, 25, okay. I haven't figured out a best way of how to look for lateral movement on the actual event logs. You'll see user authentication, but that only means that WinRM is being used, or you'll see an API call, but nothing that would detect actual lateral movement. However, there's an interesting pattern on the processes. So when you're using WinRM and like the WinRS tool or the Metasploit a lot, then this gives me a lot of results. So I still need to figure out exactly what's the best way to filter things. But maybe if your environments are not using WinRM, then this could be a good one. Or maybe on your workstation, like Windows 7, when you're not where you're not using WinRM, this could be an interesting way of hunting. This is just how the events look like. Well, I'm gonna skip this. All right, so now we're gonna talk about the tool, right? So now I did this analysis of, I wanted to know the techniques that are out there, I wanted to know how they look like, and then I wanted to write a tool. So this tool is called Oriana. So when I first got that, I actually want to stay here. So when I first got that email with saying like your DerbyCon talk was accepted, I was like happy, but also freaking out. I was like, okay, so what am I going to do now? I had done the research of how these events look like and the types of waves, but I actually wanted to present something tangible that I could release and hopefully have people use in their hunts. This is how I decided I wanted to create a tool. First of all, let's talk about, this is a threat hunting tool. So threat hunting has been, people are talking about threat hunting a couple of, I don't know how long, but it's kind of a new concept, at least for me, no more than 3 or 4 years. But basically for us, what threat hunting means, it means not waiting for an alert, just going out to your environment proactively and looking for bad stuff. So you are no longer waiting for an alert from your SIM or your whatever tool that you may have. You're going out there, digging through information, and armed with knowledge of how offensive is done, use that to create analytics to detect bad stuff. And usually start with an hypothesis. And then you develop the hunt, you examine the results, you're definitely going to get some false positives, you refine, and then you do this hunt again, right? So this is what Oriana will do. So for this first version, I wanted to start simple. So I wanted to focus on using Windows event logs, like I said, and right now I actually focus on only 4 events, and you'll see how interesting, how much information we can get only from 4 events. So, which is the authentication event, service creation, create a scheduled task, and then the WMI event 2 event. I wanted the tool to provide visibility. Sometimes when you're going on a hunt, sometimes a hunt can be just a simple question. An interesting question to ask to your environment. And I wanted Oriana to allow me to ask simple questions that may have interesting findings, responses. Of course, I wanted the tool not only to provide visibility, but also to point out potential lateral movement events. And I can do 3 right now: WMI, services, and tasks. And we'll do more hopefully as we work on these 2 more. I also wanted the tool to allow me to pivot through data. Once you're in a hunt, you usually, you find a lead, and then you go back to another lead, and then you go back, and you want to tie things together. It's not, so if I write a tool that's a command line tool that just, you run an analytics, it gives you a response, then you cannot really go back to another data point. So that's why I wanted the tool to be a web tool. So I built that web tool. And this is the process for Oriana. You first export, index data, you analyze, and then you hunt. So let's quickly talk about that. So export. So one PowerShell script that took me a while to do because I don't know PowerShell, but basically it uses 2 commandlets, get win event and export CSV. So basically it grabs those 4 events that I was telling you about, puts them into a CSV, and we basically get 1 CSV per host, right? And it's only like 100 kilobytes. And now you cannot just call getWin event and then export CSV that object. You need to do some processing on that object, because by default it won't give you all the fields of the event, like for example logon type or user or IP. But I found online that you could do it with a for loop and XML, and then you get the point. So we get 1 CSV per host. Now, also one interesting thing is, like, if you go to Event Viewer and filter by 4624, the event ID, you'll see a lot of events that are just noise. The system account, the computer account. So I wanted to filter that out initially through PowerShell, and just a couple of ifs to filter that out, so I don't have to index that noise, because it's just noise. I want to focus on actual users. And then, like I said, you get 1 CSV per host and no more than 100K or 150K kilobytes. So you get the point. It's almost nothing, and going back at least a couple of months. All right. Then this is the index piece. So I'm using Python and an MVC framework called Django, and so we have a relational database, right? So this is kind of how I define the schema. You have a host and a user, and then they're both connected to each other with an authentication event. You have the service creation event, the 7045, and then the 4699, which is a schedule dedicated to locally, or the unique number of hosts a user has authenticated to remotely. This could be interesting. And same for the host. So we'll just jump to the demo. I have to say though, when I was thinking about doing this demo, I was thinking, if I'm gonna just move laterally on a fake environment with 5 hosts and present this to you, it's just not gonna be compelling, right? So I actually did a real hunt on my environment, and this is real data. So we're actually gonna do a hunt using Oriana with real data. And something cool, with a real pen test that happened during this time. We're gonna hunt for lateral movement on using this tool, like I said, on a real environment. Of course, I've obfuscated all the data, so you won't see users or computer names or IP address, so they won't make sense. But just remember, this is real data. So like I'm talking about 3,000 hosts, 3,000 users, 1.5 million authentication events, 60,000 service creation events. You get the point, right? So this is all real data from real hosts, from a real environment, from real users. On top of that, there was a pen test going on. So I did, when you call PowerShell for getting the event log, you can put a max result. So I did 10,000, and that took me about like 2 months. Yep. And by the way, to ingest all the data for 3,000 hosts, it took like 1.5 hours. And to run the analytics, it took like 8 minutes. So in a couple of hours, you can run this hunt, right? All right, so enough. Oops. Oh. No bueno. Sorry about that. Oh. Come on. Okay. All right. So this is Oriana. So let's go. We're gonna do the visibility piece first, right? So I want to look for hosts, and here's what I have. So for each host, I have, as you can see, I have 3,000 hosts, right? So I did some basic calculations, and this is a cool question. So, hey, Oriana, show me the host name that has the most amount of remote users, so meaning the most remote users have connected to this host. So I can do this with just 2 clicks. 1, 2. So this could start an incident response process, right? Hey, why is this host have 88 remote users connecting to it, right? You can do the same for local users, for example. Hey, why is this host have 37 local users? And of course, conference rooms and kiosks, things like that, right? But you get to ask some interesting questions, right? Now, if you're curious about a particular host, you can just click on it, and it's going to give you the local users that connected to it uniquely, the remote users, and then the remote authentication events, and the local authentication events. So now I can have a really interesting picture of a host and who's connected to it, right? So this is simple. And like I said, this is all pivotable. I don't know if that's a word, but I can just click on a user. Hey, this user looks weird. Why is he connected? So you can click on the user, and you'll get that user's information. Once again, this is the user view, so now you now get the host that he has connected to locally. Again, I do this local and remote thing based on the 4624 event and the type of event, right? Logon type 3 or 10. All the other ones are local. So remote host and then the authentication events. All right, that's simple, Mauricio. Show us something more cool. Okay. All right, so the user's view. So let me ask this simple question to Oriana. So who's the user who's connecting to the most hosts remotely, right? So 2 clicks. 1, 2. Why is this guy connecting to 2,300 hosts, right? So you can click on this user, and it will get you to the user profile, and you'll see all the remote hosts that he connected to. What's up with that, right? And you can get the authentication events also to kind of like see a picture of when this happened. And as you can see, most of the events happens on August 31st. Now, this would probably start an incident response investigation on your environment, and I'm just going to fast forward, and hold on, I need to charge my computer. Do we have an outlet somewhere? Oh,
behind you.
There's one back there.
No, it won't. It's not that big. Oh, thanks. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Okay, so is it gonna get here? No, just this. Thank you. I don't want this to die. Oh, there you go. We did it. Thank you. All right. Cool. We didn't die. Okay. All right. So if you're a pen tester, you probably know this. Once you get a shell, what is the first thing that you're gonna do? See if that user that you're running a command as has privileges on other hosts. You want to know if you're a local admin somewhere else. So if you think about it from a Metasploit perspective, you may want to run the SMB login script. If you think about it from PowerSploit, you want to run like the find local admin module, or you can use just netuse in a bad script, right? So this is exactly what happened here. The pen testers somehow got this username, and they wanted to see if they were a local admin across the environment, and this is why they authenticated to 3,000 hosts in less than 30 minutes. So boom, Oriana is showing me something interesting. Now let's get to even something more interesting. And you know what? So you know how when Red Team does presentations, when they get a shell, people clap and cheer? I think what we should do is, like, if we find a lot of movement, we need to do something, right? See what I did there? All right. So no, not yet. I'm going to show you more cool stuff. All right, so I'm going to go to the services page. All right, so I get all the unique services that are in my environment, like 900. I can click around, and right away I find something interesting on the third page. What is this? And I just click on it, and this is someone moving laterally with PowerShell, right? So now that I've learned this, I'm like, okay, now let me ask Oriana a cool question, which is, who else is running PowerShell on a service? Once again, I found 12. You can rule whatever you want here, right? So jump to the next demo, so I'm here. And this, I promise, this is where it gets even cooler. Seconds to create a service event. So I wanted to start with the simplest thing, right? Just take a look at it from a time perspective. Authentication event type 3, of course, and then service creation or schedule task or WMI event, and we'll see the results in a little bit. Frequency analysis is a technique used for threat hunting a lot. It allows you to detect outliers, and I use that a lot, heavily on the tool, as you'll see. And finally, you know how when I tested the tools, I noticed that the service names that were created by Metasploit and all these tools, they were always random, right? And even the workstation name sometimes. So I wanted a way to detect this randomness. And I took a look at regular expressions, but I moved away from that because I think regular expressions are first based on a sample. So you would do that, one for Metasploit, one for CobbleStrike, one from all the tools. So I don't want to do that. Also, they don't have context. They lack the context. So I was talking to one of our colleagues, Nelson, who's like a really sharp guy back at work who likes data science and analytics and stuff like that. So he came up with a simple algorithm that uses frequency analysis, and he called it the Ngram score. Really simple. Basically, we grab all the service names, we grab the first two letters of the service name, and then count the number of times that those two letters appear on all the other service names. And then you create a matrix of these weights. So if that's on the middle, you'll see the Python script, and this is what we get, like a matrix of two letters and then the weight, right? So now we are doing frequency analysis on two letters across all the services. Then we can calculate a score of a particular service name based on this, right? So all right, demo number 2, and this is gonna get cooler, guys, I promise. All right. So this is the possible lateral movement events. So I only have 38, all these tables like jQuery, just sortable. So I can start seeing a pattern. What's the pattern? There's one user that seems to have been doing all the lateral movement, right? This user is probably compromised, right? And I can just click on this. Once again, this user, potential lateral movement event. Once again, this is Cobalt Strike. So most of these events are actually for lateral movement. Yes, I have to say they're for the lateral movement session. So out of the 38 events, only 16 sessions. So let me sort by the lateral movement session that has the most. So this has 7. So let's click on this. And this happened on August 31st from 10:07 a.m. to 11:59 a.m. So almost 1 hour and 52 seconds of that session. I click on it, and look at this nice timeline. So at 10:07 a.m., this computer got popped with a malicious service. Actually 1 hour and 20 minutes later, at 11:35, this guy got popped. You get the point, right? This guy, this guy, this guy. So this is, and then when the pen testers were like, yeah, we did something. Like, is this what you did? It's like, yeah, that's what I did. We knew it. We knew what happened. That was awesome. That was awesome to be able to show them, this is what you did, right? Yep. That's what I did. I actually wanted to, talk to our boss and figure out, hey, these guys, they move laterally around for like almost 4 hours. So it's like, is that right? Are we paying them for these hours or not? You get the point, right? So all right, so I can just click on this other session, and then of 10 events, and you can see a nice timeline of all the lateral movement events that happened during this time. PowerShell, Cobalt Strike, WMI, name it. All right, so now let's go to frequency analysis. So binary path. So service creation events have a binary path. Scheduled task events also have the path. So I put them together and did frequency analysis. So I can sort by the number of times. So these guys happen the most. So it's probably they're not malicious, because if they're happening on my environment a lot, it means that they're part of my build or something, right? But what about the guys that are only happen once? What's up with those? Right away, we can see this bad guy, right? And you get the point. We'll see more bad guys as we click around. Another simple one that I wanted to do, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Another simple one that I wanted to do is the number of characters. So I want to sort by the most number of characters. So I can sort, all these guys are malicious. Right? PowerShell, PowerShell, PowerShell. All right, the n-gram analysis. So service name, once again, I can do based on count. So why this only happened once on my environment, and this is bad, by the way, and you can find more bad stuff. But this is the I was telling you about to detect randomness of a string. So the lower the score, the higher the chances that this is random. So let's. It actually works. So I knew this, but I didn't. 1, 2. So this guy, why is this guy RDPing to 11 hosts, right? You may want to know about that, and you can just click on it, and you'll see exactly when and where he connected, right? So that was the demo. I hope you liked it, guys. I mean, it worked, right? On my environment, I was able to detect it. I claim this as success. All right, so I'm just going to finish with a really philosophical question. Future work before that. Future works. I want to onboard more logs. Do more frequency analysis. If you have any ideas, send them over. I really want to implement that. I don't have the code yet on GitHub, because to be honest, I'm just ashamed of my code, because it's really brute forcing everything. So I'm trying to clean things up, and then I'll release it. Definitely make it open source for everyone to be able to download, use, and hopefully you'll be able to use it on your hunts. Thank you. And this was the philosophical question that I wanted to leave you guys. And thank you, thank you.
Very cool stuff.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Means a lot.
Great talk.
Oh, thank you.
Quick question for you while you clean this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we're using, have you used wet?
Oh, they invented already?
Yeah. To do, because we do a lot of IDs. I think, yeah, in real time, but I'm thinking about we can easily add that logic into, to get a new, because we have, we filter all this in our Elasticsearch that all like, built its own custom data. Well, that's easier to just get it working, you know, yeah.
So could you dump your logs out of the event log forwarder instead of reaching out to all the different machines? Oh, okay. Yeah, we do event log collection.
Yeah.
Because we already collect all the events.
Hey, right, so we have our good.
Oh, yeah, we
So, thank you, sir. Love to talk. We've already done a lot of logic, kind of, but not to that level.
Okay, good. I'm like, I just talk. We're going to reverse that. All this here, this is your lunch. Because we're already doing half of it as Splunk. We're taking the same event. We're talking about, we're going to it's just, it's better than you.
Hey guys, hey.
I'm a popular guy.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Great talk. Yeah, I saw your top driver was those things. So we went through there. Yeah. Well, I recognize your name too. You've talked to me. That's right. Yeah. But what until you started? Great talk, man. That was awesome. Cool talk. Can't wait to see it.
When do you do that?
Yeah, how's it going? Craig Moretto.
Okay, how's it going?
Good, man. Yourself? Great talk.
Thanks.
I was going to ask you a question. So are you pulling the logs or are you getting a dump of the logs?
Yeah, so PowerShell, I run the PowerShell locally on that host, and then that dumps it to a network share, and then my tool grabs it from a network share.
Okay, cool. All right, perfect. Thanks. I appreciate it.
So theoretically, you could just tell them where you have multiple stuff.
Yep, every week, every day. That's kind of what I'm trying to get to. Yeah, every week. Batch. So let me clean out.
So how long till you think you have the
I would say
I've been thinking ever since last night.
So I came in with the tail and I'm sure you're talking about it right now. Unfortunately, I'm working. I got a real quick question.
Yeah.
So
Skill, man.
I'm going to have to tell you, you know Adrian.
Oh, yeah.
Talk to Adrian. He's going to have all these when I'm done. I don't give him any money. Adrian,
thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
I have a picture of your previous years.
Oh, okay. Yes, I do. Not other alerts that we have. Like malicious email, but not even my SIM. That's why I want to go ahead and
so this research was actually
The guy's computer, it didn't like it. It didn't like it.
One guy, the guy says he's over here, and he breaks professional. Sorry, the guy's processing. Yeah, I'm impressed as hell. I'm really
impressed because I'm so
I also ordered
No, but
And then I don't want to use it.
And I was bad
Where's Matthew and Rob? I hope he knows Matthew is sick.
I think the child is coming up with this provision. I'm not sure how that.
No, I'm going to put that in parentheses behind his name on my phone.
You're gonna have to do that.
Change the, I'll change the phonetic of him in my agricultural to Matthew.
Instead of your oh, thank you. Yes. There you go, man.
When already talked to you or did you buy books or?
That's gonna be okay. Yeah, but it doesn't mean a lot.
Was the 80 talk pretty good? Oh, really? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Somebody had my mom and brought it back to me.
That was nice. Are you happy?
Oh, there it goes again. Do what? That's true. My fault.
Helping people pick a lot. No, this is presented this morning. Oh. Yeah. I know who he is. It's on my Facebook and my Twitter. Any response? Not yet. It just says the message. Oh. Do him a favor and light his load if he doesn't want you back. Oh, those are for Jeopardy. Oh, Scott, if you need help, I used to run the film strip projector at school, so I can help with that.
Appreciate it, man.
Those are not for takeaway. I could resist.
Switch it up. Back to you.
Although I know those good
She's actually really cool. He was not fully bad just because he was happy but talk to him.
Do what?
You try turning it off and then on again? Great.
See if that works.
I can reboot the internet.
Call out source.
Yeah, it's possible with that.
Take all your cash out.
Alright. Give this a try. The kill chain of that attack and figure out what are some of the free mitigations we can deploy as opposed to just relying on blinky boxes. Also, I want to thank everyone for being here because I realize I'm the last thing yet again standing between you and all the free booze that they're providing tonight. So introduction to myself, for those who don't know me, I'm the Director of SecOps for Activision Blizzard. For us, that means threat intel, incident response, pen testing, and all that fun stuff. I'm a big fan of the whole purple team concept, and that's kind of what we have been doing to where, you know, we're all in one team. We are doing pen testing. We're seeing what the detections look like and building detections around it. Been pretty successful. A couple shameless plugs about where you can find me. You know, Twitter, Medium, my blog that I really haven't updated in a long time, but there's a couple things on there in case you're interested. Obligatory disclaimer, everything here is just my thoughts and not my employer. So again, the objectives is we're going to take a look at the kill chain. If you're not familiar, it's a concept by Lockheed Martin to where you break down every attack kind of in the logical steps that make it up. But as opposed to using the kill chain verbatim, we're going to kind of make it simplify the steps. We're going to focus on mitigations at each step of it, as well as try to find things that are free or as close to free as possible. Not going to be relying on any traditional signatures such as antivirus or just spam protection, things like that. Also, I don't want to give everyone the wrong idea. This isn't going to stop, you know, China and Russia APT cybers. Like, this is just supposed to help boost your security posture. Also the biggest focus I'm going to have is malicious Word documents, since that's kind of been a real popular theme over the past couple of years. Especially, it's kind of come back again pretty recently. So one additional concept, and not designed to stop APT attacks that I preach. There's the pre-email, which is what they do before they actually get the email to you. The actual phish and mouse spam email itself, the malware they try to deliver, and then the command and control of that malware. There's general email anti-spam tips. I'm not going to go into detail on any of these. I'm just going to assume you know what, already have them in place, but just wanted to call out because they are still important to have. You know, reverse DNS lookups, the footer appending, SPF, DKIM, sandboxing, all that good stuff. So one common theme with phishing attacks is, you know, tricking users into believing it's a legit company site. So what are some things we can do about these? If you feed it DerbyCon, you can actually, if you put them in the custom category, you can then alert on things that are in that category and better track campaigns that are hitting you. Additionally, on your spam filter side, you could proactively configure your spam filter to block any emails coming from those domains before they've even sent you one, which is pretty cool. Or depending on the size of your team, you can also, depending on also on the spam solution, you could actually create rules that actually send emails from these domains to a quarantine, so that way no email is lost or blocked, but on top of that, it didn't go to the end user, but the security team still has access to go and retrieve them and do analysis. It might be like an early warning indicator of when someone's about to target you. Oftentimes proactively find other active scams that they may have running at that time.
From the Python DNS twist, can that be automated, or is that going to be a manual process?
No, it can be automated. Yep. It even has an option to do JSON output, so you could actually feed that to another tool to automatically handle it and route it as you need. So back to our kill chain. I'm going to keep referencing this as we go. So basically on the pre-email side, that step we've applied a couple steps to help mitigate and stop that. So now we're going to look at the actual phish and mouse spam itself. So super easy one that, I mean, we all know it's best practice, but it's still often overlooked, is to really just review the attachments that your spam filter allows. A lot of spam filters by default will block some of these, but not all of them, so it's always good to do a full review. At the bottom, there's actually a How-To Geek article that lists the top 50 extensions that could be with the .doc extension. So one thing you can do is some spam filtering solutions actually have the ability to fingerprint that it has a macro in it, regardless of what the extension is. So if your solution has that, you can turn that on. Super beneficial. Another great thing you can do is there are several Outlook add-ins available that are free that make it easier for your user to go in and report it to you. One is there's Phish Alert by KnowBe4. There's the Phish Reporter itself, which is, I think it's on GitHub. PhishMe has a solution as well. I'm not too knowledgeable on it. But kind of the concept here is for anyone who's had an end user report a phishing email to them, oftentimes they'll just forward it to you, but you kind of lose the headers and then you have to go through the rigmarole of giving them directions on how to get it to you. So a lot of these add-ins, what they'll do is say the phishing email appears in the end user's mailbox, They can click the button, it deletes the email from their inbox, but actually sends it to an email of your configuration as an attachment with all the header information intact. So not only have you made it easier for them to delete it, you've made it easier for them to report it to you meaningfully with the information you need, so it's more actionable. So after the email itself, I'm sure this is an example that pretty much everyone has seen, to where they'll have some meaningful message along with a malicious Word document that has a macro in it. The idea to get the user to download the document and run the macro, and it'll do evil. So earlier we looked at the kill chain of just the email itself. But what we can do even beyond that is just take the Word document itself and break it down and do a kill chain. So there's a couple different tactics that we've all observed over the past couple years. So after you open the Word document, it's either going to have an embedded exploit in it or a macro. There's actually a Firelight link at the bottom from an attack in April that was using an exploit that was interesting. After the exploit or macro is run, it'll either download a binary or download and run a JavaScript file, download and run an HTA file, and then may even download additional files on top of that. Then the command and control starts, and then that's when bad stuff happens. So for the next couple, or the next two detections, there's one interesting thing about Windows that is important to understand and how we're going to deploy them. And that whenever a file is downloaded from the internet on a Windows machine, it actually uses an alternative data stream to tag an attribute of it that, hey, this came from the zone internet. So I'm not going to go into details about the file streams and that, but I do have some reference link up here that go into more detail. The real important thing to know is that Windows is actually tagging files that come from the internet, not from the internal network, with a zone identifier, and that's how the next couple things are going to work. So Office Protected View, it's actually enabled by default, I believe, since 2010. But the user can disable it, and oftentimes they will. So you can actually deploy a group policy to enforce it. So the reason it's open from Outlook, and you can force that to no, so then your end users can't change it at all. And what it results in is whenever they open an untrusted document, you get the protected view ribbon that tells you that hey, it contains all this, and then they have to enable editing to open it. What's also interesting is if you're talking about macros, before we get to that mitigation, is if they open a malicious Word document with macros, the end user would have to hit enable editing for protected view to then get the pop-up to enable macros. So you're actually basically giving them one more chance to get the answer wrong. So on top of that, we can look at ways to handle the macros itself. So there's actually a group policy that uses the same ADFS tagging to block macro execution if the file comes from the internet. This was, I think, first added in Office 2016, and I think it's been backported back to 2013. But again, once you've imported the management templates, there's an option to block macros from running in Office files from the internet. And what that does is if a file comes from the internet, instead of getting the typical, hey, you got to enable macros, the user will actually just get a warning that says this is blocked content, it's been completely disabled, and you have to talk to your administrator to change it. So going back to the kill chain, if we look at protected view and blocking the macros, we've basically taken care of the first chain link. So now we'll go to the next one. So most of the macros that I've seen in Office documents, they typically just end up running another script, whether it be a JavaScript file, Windows script file, or HTA, which is a HTML application. So also kind of going back to, if you remember the email filtering rules, those are the most popular attachments. Well, those are also the most popular scripts that the malicious Office docs are running. So a couple options. One, you can disable Windows Scripting Host, which will prevent these files from executing. Because one great feature about Windows is if you have a JavaScript file and you just double click on it, it'll execute. So this would take care of that. The other option that I'm kind of keen on is actually changing this, the default file association. So the idea is if you change JavaScript, WSH, and HTA to be associated with Notepad, when the user double clicks on them, it would just open in Notepad as opposed to actually running the bad stuff. Here's where you can do that in group policy pretty easily. It's under user configuration and folder options. You can see here that we basically just define the extension and then associate it with Notepad. Then when the end user opens it, this is what they get. So this is cool for two reasons. One, obviously we've stopped the attack. But two, I've observed that if an end user opens something, an attachment, all of a sudden this gobbledygook pops up, it kind of scares them and then kind of often motivates them to then report it to you. So it gives them another opportunity to do that. The other thing, so after it runs the script, it'll often run a binary depending on the attack. So I don't readily know a good way to block the binary download itself, excluding looking at things where you're doing SSL decryption and then doing network-based scanning that way. But because not every network solution has that available, we'll skip past that. So what we're going to can do from detection, if you have anything that's doing process level monitoring or sysmon deployed, is you can actually look for Office documents that are downloading executable files to disk. So even if we can't prevent that, we at least have a detection mechanism in place. So for restriction policies within group policy, the other one would be Windows firewall rules to actually firewall native binaries on the system. So software restriction policies are pretty cool. So if you can't do full application whitelisting, you can actually basically strategically deploy locations within the operating system that are going to be blacklisted from running executables. So it's under group policy, it's under the security settings. And so creating the rules is super simple. It's just a matter of defining the path as well as the, you can do a wildcard extension of what you're going to block. And then I guess one thing I would look out for, especially in the app data temp, is that a lot of third-party programs, whenever they go to do an auto update, it will drop the update file in there. So you either have to be prepared to handle those or whitelist those specifically. So kind of again with any other change, test it as much as possible. Another, on the same note, another cool program to check out is called CryptoPrevent. I think the company that makes it's called Foolish IT. Oh, we had a good run. Yeah, so there's another third-party program called CryptoPrevent. It actually does a lot of cool things. Actually uses local group policy on the back end. But I've never deployed it from like a network perspective, but for like on your own like personal computer, it's really cool because it'll actually define software restriction policies for a lot of the top locations that malware deploys. I think with just the default settings, it adds like 3,000 to 5,000 software restriction policies, and in my experience, has had minimal negative impact. Another thing we can look at doing is the firewalling that I mentioned. So, and this is kind of based on the command line activity that a lot of the attacker groups are using whenever they're going to actually execute their malware. So there's, as an example, there's 2 recent campaigns that employed Casey Smith's, one of his application whitelisting bypass techniques. and from a couple different actors as well, APT32 and APT19. The idea in his application whitelisting bypass techniques, which he has several, is he's going to use a binary that's native to the Windows operating system and get that to then execute the malicious binary. So even if you're doing full application whitelisting, his techniques actually would still execute. So that's pretty cool. So on this specific technique that they used, here's an example of it from Carbon Black whenever they did a study on it. So they would use RegServe32, which is a native and signed Windows binary, and they can actually pass it an HTTP address that would actually download the XML file, which would run whatever code is in it. So in this silly example, it's actually just going to run calc.exe. But this is a very common way used by some of the more advanced groups when they want malware to run in your system, partly because they're getting assigned Microsoft binary to execute their code, also because it bypasses application whitelisting. So one easy thing we can do to help prevent a lot of these is within group policy, you can set a Windows firewall rule that would actually say RegServe32 isn't allowed to make network connections. And there's actually several other binaries that he has found which have the same functionality, so I would recommend going through it and doing it on as much of these as possible. There's his blog right there if you want to read more about some of the attacks. But that's kind of an easy low-hanging fruit that would have prevented some of those attacks. All right, so at this point, we've taken care of the pre-email, the actual phishing email spam itself, and then the execution of the malware. So a couple things we can do on the command and control side. There are command and control itself. We can look at web filtering. So what I've done here is basically, if you think about the life cycle of a bad actor domain, they first register it. Oftentimes they'll register it up to 6 months before they actively use it. At some point, once they start using it, it may get flagged as bad, or use dynamic domains. So with a process in place prepared for when users find that and report it to you, you need to be able to get it whitelisted so they don't have a mutiny. So consider integrating your firewalls with publicly available bad IP list. So there's a couple good ones out there. Emerging Threats has a really good one that actually aggregates a lot of great information into one IP feed. And it's super easy with a lot of firewalls to actually integrate that list directly into the firewall, so it's blocking it proactively. You could also consider a process change for incident response. So what I've seen oftentimes is that certain actors will continue using the same hosting providers over and over. So a lot of times if you get a scan or see a bad IP and it's at say a certain VPS provider, one thing you can do is see what that VPS provider is, see what all their other subnets is, and then actually block the entire VPS provider if it's not one that's required for legitimate business use. All right, so on the Office macro kill chain itself, so now we've blocked the macros, we've blocked a lot of the exploits, we've blocked some of the execution of the binaries. We've also controlled JavaScript and HTA by changing the default file association and or disabling Windows scripting hosts, as well as we've greatly mitigated the chance that there's command and control will be able to call out to bad guy servers. So recently, there's been a big PDF uptick using email campaigns. And it's interesting because a lot of times the PDF will, so the user would open the PDF, then open the embedded Word document, which would then do all the stuff that we've already mitigated. So this is a great example of if we had deployed all the mitigations at each of the kill chain links, as soon as the new tactic came out, we had already blocked it and didn't have anything to worry about. All right, so kind of, so a recap of everything we've deployed to this point. So obviously we've reduced all of our overall phishing and mouse spam that we've received. We've made it a lot easier so that once those do get through, that the end user can report it to us. And it's more actionable because we have the header data within it. We've also blocked a lot of the common malicious attachments that are used to target the enterprise. And if a user still receives the attachment, whether it be a Word document with a macro, we've enabled protected view. We've also blocked macros from running. If they're still able to run, the subsequent scripting should be blocked. And if it's able to download a binary, we've controlled some of the ways that they use to execute the binaries. And then lastly, we've made some network control changes to help reduce the possibility of a successful C2 connection. So last big benefit that I want to throw out for looking at doing this with group policy is that what a lot of companies will observe is if you're not controlling end user access to personal emails, such as Yahoo, AOL, then a lot of
The VPS blocking and black hole stuff, do you have a process you guys are going through? Because you're obviously not going to black this Amazon, for example, but maybe a sketchy small provider, I understand.
Yeah, so I would definitely advise against blocking something like AWS, but I would say it's almost like a case-by-case basis depending on what the provider is. For example, you know, if you find some VPS provider based out of the Ukraine well, I guess one thing I would stress too is once you've identified all the subnets that belong to that provider, you should definitely check your networking logs and do a business impact analysis. Access one of those IPs, so you need to be able to whitelist that one specific one without allowing them all.
Talk a little about how Microsoft Windows can tell whether a file is coming from the internet or